Today, you and I are plunging into what might be one of the most intriguing and, frankly, perplexing paradoxes in the global economy right now.
Yeah.
Talking about India.
Hmm.
On one hand, you constantly hear about its incredible economic rise. It's now the world's fourth largest economy, you know, boasting a GDP of approximately $4.2 trillion.
Hmm.
It's even surpassed giants like Japan.
Quite something.
Yeah, it's truly a macro triumph, a shining example often celebrated by ministers, by businessmen alike. But then there's the feeling on the ground for many of its citizens, which is, well, strikingly different.
That's right.
It's like living a developed world life inside your home, sort of this bubble of modern convenience, but the moment you step outside, reality hits. The country is still grappling with pretty basic infrastructure and services.
That's precisely it. And we're framing this deep dive as an exploration into the Indian paradox. Our mission today is to truly unpack this disconnect. How can a nation be such a global economic powerhouse, yet still face these widespread challenges in, well, per capita well-being, job security, and just the overall quality of life for its people?
Okay.
We've got some fascinating insights. We're drawing from a comprehensive report titled India's Paradox, Growth, Inequality, and the Jobs Crisis, and also a really compelling YouTube video. It's aptly named, India's GDP is Growing, but Your Life Sucks. Why?
Huh. Catches your attention.
It does, and these sources are going to help us understand the why behind this paradox and what it really means, for the daily lives of millions.
Yeah, the paradox you've laid out is truly fascinating. Where do we even begin to unpack something this complex?
Well, let's start by acknowledging the undeniable macro triumphs. India truly is an economic success story by many measures.
Absolutely. So the headline figures are staggering. We hear about India's macro triumphs constantly. Can you really lay out just how impressive these economic benchmarks are and maybe what's driving them?
Certainly. As you mentioned, India is indeed the fourth largest economy, hitting that $4.2 trillion GDP mark and surpassing Japan. That's a truly significant achievement.
It really is.
And it's not just a momentary peak. Projections show a robust, 6.3% growth rate for 2025. That cements its place as one of the fastest growing major economies out there.
Okay.
And the numbers keep impressing. Total exports reached a massive U.S. $825 billion in 2024-25. That's a whopping 76% increase over just the last decade.
Wow, 76%.
Yeah. This surge is powered by sectors like engineering goods, electronics, pharmaceuticals, and services exports. They've more than doubled.
So what's underpinning all this growth?
Broadly, it's strong private consumption and significantly public investment, particularly in infrastructure. That's been a big push.
That's an incredible story of national economic success, undeniably. But you mentioned something intriguing earlier, a GDP mirage. What exactly does that mean when we put it next to these huge macro triumphs?
Right. Well, what's fascinating here is how that macro triumph creates what we can call a GDP mirage. Because despite all those impressive aggregate numbers, when you zoom in on the individual, the picture changes dramatically.
How so?
India's per capita GDP is only $2,880 per capita.
Only $2,880.
Yeah, which ranks at around 139th globally. Just let that sink in for a moment, you, our listener. An entire year's income for an average Indian compared to less than a month's for, say, a German.
That's a stark comparison.
It is. That's not just a statistic. That's a profound per capita tragedy that truly underscores the disconnect we're exploring. And to help us really understand this, the YouTube source introduces a pretty powerful framework. Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, India.
Okay, tiers.
Yeah. Tier 1, or private sector excellence, this is the shining example. This is where India truly feels like a developed country. It's driven purely by the private sector, valuing comfort and convenience above all else.
That Tier 1 sounds almost aspirational, maybe even for someone in a developed country. But is it truly representative, or is it perhaps a very specific kind of privilege bubble within this larger narrative?
Yeah.
What does that Tier 1 look like in real life?
It's absolutely a specific urban lifestyle, one that many experience and certainly aspire to. Think of Bengaluru, the tech capital. People ordering Starbucks coffee, working at co-working spaces like WeWork, hailing instant auto taxis with an app like Rapido, or chilling at trendy craft beer cafes.
Right, the whole modern urban experience.
Exactly. Or in Delhi, it's eating at fancy Hauskaz cafes, shopping at upscale Khan Market, ordering a pedicure via Reuben Club right to their home.
A pedicure at home.
Wow. Yeah, or even getting house help arranged in like 10 minutes through an app. This level of convenience and efficiency is often superior, genuinely, to what's available in some developed economies. It's a real testament to private sector innovation and customer focus.
Okay, so that's the comfortable, convenient Tier 1 experience, almost a world unto itself. But here's where it gets really interesting, because you said that comfort often ends the moment daily life has to interact with public services.
Precisely. And that's where we dive into Tier 2 and Tier 3 India, and things become, well, haphazard, to say the least.
Okay.
Tier 2 is where the government works with the private sector. This involves our roads, footpaths, drains, public transport, traffic management.
This stuff you use every day.
The stuff you use every day. And the examples from the source are really telling. Bengaluru traffic is famously jam-packed. The deputy chief minister even quipped that even God can't fix Bengaluru's roads.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. In Mumbai, despite some of the most expensive houses and restaurants in areas like Bandra, footpaths are often unusable, just full of garbage or parked cars.
Right.
And in DLF Gurgaon, a place synonymous with luxury homes and malls, you see severe waterlogging every single time it rains. It happens in Kolkata, too, similar issues.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? You can get that instant taxi or home pedicure, but just getting across town is chaos. Or your fancy apartment block floods.
It really highlights the disconnect. And what's truly striking, as the source reported, is the sentiment some citizens expressed. They observed that basic urban infrastructure maintenance in major Indian cities seemed, well, lacking compared to surprisingly cleaner conditions they'd seen even in some regions facing significant challenges, like war-torn areas.
Really, that's a powerful comparison.
It is. It highlights this deep frustration with local governance, with Tier 2.
So we've navigated Tier 1's private sector efficiency and then the often frustrating collaborative mess of Tier 2. But there's one more layer, perhaps the most critical and frankly the most daunting you mentioned. That's Tier 3.
Tier 3 is indeed the most feared black hole, as the source puts it, because here the government has a sole monopoly. No private company can enter.
And this includes
critical areas, the police, the courts, the municipalities. It's basically where people just pray they never have to interact with the system.
Why such dread?
Well, look at the numbers. A property case in Delhi can take, on average, 26 years to resolve.
26 years.
26 years. Imagine waiting nearly 3 decades for a property dispute. It's just staggering. It shows how the justice system, or maybe the lack of a functioning one for many, becomes a truly debilitating factor in daily life.
I can only imagine.
And according to the source, only 25% of Indians actually trust the police.
A quarter.
Yeah. So citizens have largely accepted, it seems, that Tier 3 will never work.
And the consequences of that belief?
They're profound. People behave as if no system truly enforces rules. Traffic signals, more like suggestions. Queue etiquette, often ignored. This systemic failure even leads to a reliance on Bahubali leaders, basically. Local strongmen or influential figures, often operating outside formal legal structures.
Right.
For mediation, for getting things done, rather than relying on the established legal system.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, or anyone living in India? It means that even if you have money, a good college education, a well-paying Tier 1 type job, you still face these daily struggles. They just significantly impact your quality of life.
Absolutely.
And what's particularly frustrating, the source points out, is that politicians often seem to take urban voters for granted. They prioritize other areas because fixing urban civic infrastructure isn't maybe a top political priority for them, despite urban taxpayers contributing so heavily.
And this leads us directly to another critical piece of the paradox: jobless growth. India's impressive economic growth isn't translating into enough jobs. It's creating what some are calling a demographic time bomb.
Jobless growth. Explain that a bit more.
We're seeing an employment collapse, or at least significant pressure, in the formal sector. Think about global tech layoffs, over 76,000 workers globally just in 2025. That's hitting the Indian IT sector hard. Major firms like Infosys, TCS, they're being really cautious in their hiring. Some mid-tier firms are even seeing staff reductions, so reskilling in areas like AI, cloud, analytics, it's becoming absolutely crucial just to adapt.
Okay, so challenges in the formal tech sector.
Yeah.
But what about the broader workforce?
Well, compounding this, a staggering 90% of all workers nationally, 90%, and 80% even in urban areas are in informal arrangements.
90%. What does informal mean exactly here?
It means they lack contracts, they lack crucial social security, benefits, that safety net. Think about that. 9 out of 10 workers nationally without a contract, without security. What does that mean for their daily lives, their ability to plan, their aspirations?
It's precarious, to say the least. And what about the youth? The millions entering the workforce every year. Are they finding opportunities in this booming economy?
That's where the time bomb analogy really comes into focus. We're talking about 28 million unemployed, educated youth actively looking for jobs right now.
28 million.
Yeah. The unemployment rate for youth aged 15-29 in May 2025 was 13.7% in rural areas and even higher, 17.9% in urban areas. A massive 83% of all unemployed individuals fall into this youth bracket.
So the jobs aren't there for them.
Millions are entering the workforce annually, but job creation is falling far, far short of the need. And adding another layer to this, India's female labor participation rate is only around 24%.
That sounds low.
It is significantly lower than the global average, which is about 47%. This is due to a really complex mix of factors, cultural narratives, the huge burden of unpaid care work, limited access to affordable childcare.
So it's not simply a question of if the economy is growing, but how it's growing.
Yeah.
And perhaps more crucially, for whom it's growing.
Exactly.
That surging GDP, contrasted with soaring youth unemployment, paints this picture of prosperity that for millions just remains frustratingly out of reach. That's the essence of this jobless growth you mentioned.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see these deep-seated structural flaws and policy gaps that really fuel this inequality and hinder more inclusive development.
Okay, what are these structural flaws?
Well, one major issue is the inequality engine itself. India's tax-to-GDP ratio is remarkably low. It's about 11.8% in FY 2024-25, which trails far behind developed nations like Germany or Japan, where it's over 30%.
And the impact of that low tax take.
It limits public investment massively. And what's more, wealth concentration is extreme. The richest 1% control over 40% of the country's wealth.
40% for the top 1%.
Yes, while the bottom 50% owns just 3%.
Wow.
And this directly translates to underfunded public services. Public spending on health and education is significantly below OECD averages. That's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, mostly developed nations. This leads to inadequate systems that disproportionately affect the poor.
It's clear that a limited tax base starves public services, which then, as you pointed out, makes inequality even worse. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
But beyond how money is collected and spent, what about the very shape of India's economy? Are there fundamental imbalances in its sectors?
Absolutely. That's where sectoral imbalances come in. The services sector, think IT, finance, etc., accounts for over 50% of the gross value added GVA, basically the value produced.
Right.
But it only employs about 32% of the workforce.
Why the gap?
Its high-skill nature. It just can't absorb large numbers of low-skilled workers coming from other sectors. And in stark contrast, you have the agriculture sector. It contributes only around 15% to GDP,
15%.
but still employs approximately 42% of the total workforce.
42%.
Yeah.
So many people trapped in low productivity work.
Exactly. Low productivity, low income roles. On top of this, India faces export vulnerability. U.S. tariffs, for instance, like a 27% duty on polished diamonds, maybe 32% on gold jewelry, they threaten key export-oriented industries. And these are often labor-intensive industries like gems, jewelry, textiles, so tariffs hit jobs directly.
And finally, the source points to what it calls governance failures. Given everything we've discussed about the Tier 2 and Tier 3 challenges, this seems like a critical piece of the puzzle.
Indeed. Crucial reforms in labor laws, in land regulations, particularly restrictive leasing laws, and in agriculture, they remain incomplete. Stalled, really. This holds back productivity gains across the board.
So potential solutions are known, but not fully implemented.
Pretty much. And while India has shown incredible success in digital public infrastructure, things like Aadhaar, the biometric ID, and UPI, the payment system,
Yeah, those are often high-added.
they are, and they've boosted efficiency in areas like tax administration. But this contrasts sharply with inefficiencies elsewhere. Subsidy systems, for example, still suffer from significant leakages and poor targeting. People who need them don't always get them. This uneven state capacity means that even good policies can struggle to make a widespread positive impact on the ground.
So these deep-seated structural issues, these policy gaps, the governance failures, they truly explain why the benefits of India's impressive growth aren't reaching everyone, and why those daily frustrations, those Tier 2 and 3 problems, persist even for those with decent jobs and incomes.
Now, moving to the global context for a second, India's growth actually stands out amidst global headwinds. It's largely driven by resilient domestic consumption and that government infrastructure investment we mentioned.
So internally focused in a way.
To a large extent, yes, which makes it a bit of an outlier compared to other emerging markets like Brazil and Mexico, which are seeing slowdowns due to global factors. However, global protectionist tendencies and those tariffs we talked about, 10-25% duties on various Indian exports, they do pose significant risks to export revenues and therefore jobs.
This raises an important question then. What can actually be done? How do you shift from this exclusionary growth to something more like inclusive productivity? It sounds like a monumental task.
It absolutely requires a multi-pronged approach. There's no single silver bullet. On the immediate pathways, the sources suggest prioritizing universal basic services, UBS, really focusing on strengthening healthcare, education, and social security for everyone.
Yeah, strengthening the safety net.
Exactly. Then, fostering MSME export hubs, that's micro, small, and medium enterprises, giving them targeted support, better access to credit, technology, and helping integrate them into global value chains. Using schemes like RADITEP, that's remission of duties and taxes on exported products and tariff relaxations through free trade agreements.
Helping smaller businesses compete globally.
Precisely. And finally, in the near term, rationalizing labor laws, simplifying them to encourage formal employment, make it easier for businesses to hire formally, while still protecting workers' rights.
Those sound like crucial first steps. And what about the long-term transformations needed to truly change the trajectory?
Well, for the longer term, the discussion involves potentially reevaluating the tax system towards more progressive wealth taxation, possibly increasing taxes on very high incomes and capital gains to fund those public services we talked about.
Addressing the inequality engine directly.
That's the idea. Also, strategic investments in vocational skilling and reskilling programs are absolutely crucial, especially for workers potentially affected by generative AI. One estimate suggests 38 million could be affected, helping them adapt to evolving job demands.
Preparing the workforce for the future.
Yes. And finally, comprehensive land and agricultural reforms. This means clarifying land titles, which is a huge issue, rationalizing land leasing laws, and modernizing agricultural practices to boost productivity and incomes there.
It's clear that GDP growth, while absolutely necessary, just isn't sufficient on its own, is it?
Not at all.
The focus really must decisively shift towards inclusive productivity, where economic growth directly translates into improved living standards, decent work opportunities, and more equitable wealth distribution for all citizens. So to recap, we've explored this core paradox. India's impressive economic growth on the global stage not translating into a better everyday life for many of its citizens. We've seen how factors like jobless growth, extreme inequality, and these governance gaps, particularly in tiers 2 and 3, create a system where a significant portion of the population is left behind. This deep dive has really shown why looking beyond just those headline GDP numbers is so crucial for truly understanding a nation's well-being, would you say?
Absolutely. And this raises an important question for you, the listener. How might this dynamic, a booming economy alongside struggling public services or high inequality, how might that manifest in other fast-growing regions, or maybe even in areas closer to where you live? It's not unique to India, perhaps?
That's a great point. And for final thought to mull over, consider a specific urban or local issue you encounter regularly. Maybe it's public transport, maybe waste management, or access to certain services in your own community. Does it feel like a tier 2 or tier 3 problem based on our discussion? And what might that tell us about where the benefits of broader economic growth are truly landing in your own context?
Right.
Thinking about it that way helps us ask better questions and maybe push for more inclusive progress no matter where we are.